Hey, I'm just sitting here waiting for my kid to get out of soccer in my car, and I thought I would rant a little bit about Remix and why I think it's so great. I come from a Rails backend or Rails background, and I love it. I love Rails. Rails, when I was using it, was very MVC oriented, model view controller. You started with models. Everything was very database table centric, even. So you had models and views and controllers that all, through convention, map to a single database table. I found that to not scale great with really complex UI because your UI tends to talk to a lot of controllers and a lot of database tables. And so you ended up making controllers, or I ended up making controllers that didn't map with the normal Rails conventions to like a single table. But it was still awesome. Still loved it. Not a criticism. Just that was my experience. Is that those conventions I didn't get to use them a whole lot because I just had to make my own controllers. And so it starts there. Starts with database tables, models, and then controllers, and then view, and then it kicks out HTML, and then that's kind of it. That's where it ends. When I was using it, I know there's Hotwire and other cool stuff that I don't know a whole lot about. Basically stopped at HTML, and then from there, if I wanted to do anything in the browser with JavaScript, I just had to put on the page and then deal with it, and like you're on your own, and it was awesome. What's cool about Remix is it starts not with database tables, but not even with JavaScript. It starts right in the middle with HTML. So Remix can render HTML on the server, and it can render it in the client. The same app gets shipped to the browser that's running on the server. It's a little different to run in the browser, of course. And then it takes a step, it takes multiple steps in both directions from the center of the stack. So from HTML, then we go and we establish routing on the server, and we establish routing in the browser. And then let's talk the server side. After controllers, so controllers in Remix are loaders and actions. They do the same thing as like a Rails controller. And those always only run on the server. So we go HTML to routing to controllers, and then that's as far as we go in Remix. We don't have an ORM, we don't have a database recommendation or anything like that. That's where we stop. But then we also start going farther into the front end than traditional MVC frameworks, where we establish routing in the browser, and we actually send your components down to the browser in JavaScript bundles. And what's really cool about client-side routing is that it's a lot faster to switch pages and navigate around. Because what we actually do after that routing layer is I call it a browser emulator. We essentially emulate the browser. When you click a link in a browser, it makes a document request. It requests the whole HTML document from the server. Not in Remix, with the browser. This is browser behavior. I mean, it's obvious. You click a link, you get a new document. Remix emulates that, where instead of asking for a whole document, we just go ask for the data, because we have your components in the browser, so we can render them. All we need is the data. That's all that's missing. So it can make some fetch requests for just the data. So those are smaller than a document, so the round trip to the server is faster. And then rendering in place right there is going to be a lot faster too, because if you didn't render in the browser, and if you didn't do client-side routing, and you ask for a whole document, the browser is going to ask for all of those resources again. It might go to the server for all your JavaScript and CSS and fonts and things, and re-download them depending on how your cache control is set up. It might go and ask if none match, and you might get like a 304, but you still got to do that round trip for them. Might pull it from disk cache. That still takes some time, but the biggest deal is then it's got to parse and evaluate everything. So if you're building a dynamic experience and using server-side routing and full page loads, it's going to be slower than something like Remix that does client-side requests. Now, this isn't new. When we showed up on the scene, we weren't the first to do this in Remix. Obviously, lots of people were doing this kind of thing. Next.js was doing this really well. Their get server-side props only ran on the server, and it would make a fetch when you click on links. What I think is really cool about Remix is this next step that we took, and it's something that I hadn't seen anybody else do. I'm seeing other people do it now, which is awesome. But it was the first time I had seen it is when we did it. And it's that we extended the concept of client-side routing, not just for links, but for forms. Now, a lot of developers don't know this, or they've forgotten, kind of like I did. that forms are a navigation event. They're just like links. When you click a link, it changes the URL and fetches a document from the server. A form, same thing. You put an action on there that's just like href on an anchor, and it's going to go to the server, ask for that. The only difference is the request method can be post instead of get. And when it's post, the form will serialize and send the form data from all the form elements inside, or maybe it's a single button and that's the only form data you've got, but a single button is still a form, and it will send that form data to the server. Server processes it and then either redirects or just renders a page right there with the new data. And so being a browser emulator, Remix does that very same thing. It hijacks the form and then says, all right, we're going to do this with client-side routing instead, serializes the form with form data, a built-in web API, and then makes a post fetch to the server. Server processes it, sends back a response, and if it redirects, then we convert that server-side redirect to a client-side redirect, and then we just render the next page there. If it just sent data, then we re-render the page. But in either case, after that post, we'll revalidate all of the data. If you didn't have JavaScript and you're just doing an MPA style mutation like this, you'll usually redirect, and then that next page on the server will go to the database and get the freshest data. And so we emulated that same thing where after a form post request is done, we say, okay, which routes are on the page? What data were we rendering already? Now let's revalidate all that, go to the server and ask for it. Very much how it would work in an MPA. Now the big difference here is not just the speed that I was talking about before, that it's faster to do these requests and just update the DOM in place instead of getting a whole new document. What's cool is now that we're in the browser, we have a stateful environment and we can control the user experience more than just what the browser is going to do with the spinning favicon. Remix will it will provide the state of these transitions and these revalidations or these navigations as they happen. So you have the ability to add some really cool pending things, pending indicators and stuff like that. But also we give you the form data that's being posted. And so you can create optimistic UI. But that means like, here's the data that's getting posted. I know what the UI is going to look like when it comes back as a complete mutation. So I'm just going to render the UI the way it's going to look in the future. And it probably is going to work out on the server, and then it'll come back, revalidate, and look that way. Of course, if it doesn't work, it'll automatically go back to the old UI. So it's really cool because we've abstracted the layer of talking to the server to do mutations and data reads and writes. You've got both of them, and you've got access to all the state that you need to build any kind of dynamic UI that's data driven. You don't have to wire up all this network connection. You don't have to wire up all the data that's going over the network. You don't even have to wire up the error handling or any of that. We'll handle the error on the server and send it back down to the browser to render an error page as well. So start at HTML and then go both directions. I think it's super cool.